1 hour of line drawing in 1 minute. I noticed that I like to draw from the head down. I don't really like try and mannequinize the body with lines anymore. I don't try to set up its gestures. I'm not really quite like exploring their form or exploring the pose and constructing the figure from the inside out, or from the Lego blocks outwards to their skin. The point of this video, I wanted to talk about drawing and just one way to think about drawing, which is also involving thinking about painting. And it's to think about drawing as just simply making stuff with lines and painting as making stuff with shapes. So if we think about the difference between drawing and painting as just two different approaches to making an art, it is a much simpler way to think about things. And it also might be a more artist-friendly mindset to try out. And what I mean by that, it's something that might help you do the art thing better. You could go on endlessly into drawing theory, painting, and painting theory. Like, they're both all topics in art, as abstract as they are and as malleable as they are, being as abstract or as concrete as you want them to be. They're all black holes. You could go endlessly into them forever and ever and ever, but thinking about it in much more reductive means, and I mean that in a good way, in that like it's reductive in the sense that it's simple and there's less to think about if we're trying to hold an idea in mind to do one or the other. It's also a much more interesting way to think about the separation between what makes something a drawing and what makes it a painting. Is it really so much is the medium we're using? I have a pencil or I have a brush. Or could it also be something a bit more, say, like with the spirit that we're approaching making this piece of art? Are we approaching it with the spirit of a drawer or a painter? Are we rendering the piece in our mind's eye like a drawer, you know, with several rounds of hatching form buildup or whatever? Or is it more with a painter, a painterly mindset, blocking out the big shapes first and splitting up the shapes, finding the shapes within the shapes to organize all our shapes, blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying that a painting that's very gestural with strokes, with a bit more of an abstract element, isn't a painting because it's painted the drawing approach. This is just another way of thinking about things, and one that I found it's been a helpful lens to see drawing and painting through. It's just kind of like a mental pair of goggles that we put on to look at the world and to look at art a bit differently. And it's the ways that our views and perspective on art changes through us trying on a new artistic mental model goggle, that we can start seeing things with a fresh pair of eyes, and we'll start noticing things we haven't noticed before. It's novelty, right? Like, we all like looking at new and different things. When we're in a new place and we feel or see something new, our attention kind of just like directs itself towards what's new and cool. Essentially what we're doing here is we're trying to think of learning art and looking at art in a newer way to set up the kind of environment that creates a lot of new ideas, new approaches, new contexts. And that, for our case, can absolutely involve looking at our old things in a new way, or doing our old things in a new way. When we're in that place where we're able to try on a new art thinking cap, our attention kind of just drives itself in finding the newest, coolest stuff for us to study and get inspired and to take back into our own practice in making art stuff. You know, think about the first time you've been on a new train route. You're looking at a lot of stuff out of the window because it's new. That doesn't happen on like the third or fourth trip, but the first time, yes, this is what we're doing. We're trying to get to the point where we can have that same feeling again of that first train ride or that first car ride or that first walk in that new place, and you're just looking everywhere because everything is new. And even if it wasn't, even if we're still looking at our old stuff, still making our old art, it's okay if everything is new to you. And that can come from us both drawing in a different way or seeing in a different way. Anyway, what I was trying to get to is this idea. Alright, so check this out. Let me try and sell drawing to you, okay? You can draw a thing probably faster as a drawing than as a painting. Here is a face. Or whoop. We all saw how long that took. If I were to try and paint that to a similar degree of detail, I would basically increase my brush size. And let's see if we can do it. Oh man. Remember, painting is making stuff with shapes, right? So, oh geez. the difference in times it took between me drawing something and painting it. I basically have the clips of me drawing put them on top of each other so you can really see the difference between what it took for me to draw a face and how long it took me to like paint a face. It took me 4 times longer to achieve something that probably looks a quarter as clear as a simple line drawing. I might have not done a great job illustrating that idea, partly because I'm not a great painter, but you can see that it's probably faster to draw someone. So there's me again with another drawing, and let me try and paint that now, being a bit more organized. I can noodle on forever with this and still not make that much progress or have as much ease as just describing simply what she's wearing just with some lines. You can tell she's wearing like one of those poofy shoulder shirts. That to me is the difference between drawing and painting. And certainly I could do this. Inside the drawing, I could start doing this, kind of just cutting it up in my head, separating out all these different shapes. And so now I'm kind of doing the opposite. Now I'm thinking about drawing, but through like kind of painting means. I'm basically turning this into a paint by numbers, which is a good way to think about this idea that painting is making stuff with shapes, is that really we're trying to make a paint by numbers map in our heads of what the form is that we're trying to describe. That's just a fancy way of saying we're trying to make the art thing, but make it using shapes. And we're trying to use those shapes to make the thing look like it's got space and depth. And now the trick is with painting, we're trying to use shapes to make the thing look round or flat or deep or thin. And on the other hand, where drawing is making stuff with lines, we're trying to use only lines to make the art thing we're trying to make look round or flat or deep or thin. How you might do that with lines, now you can do that building up the form with your lines, so usually involves making a lot of lines. How you would do that with your shapes, it primarily involves making a real life thing look like a paint by numbers map in your head and starting with the simplest version of that map, starting with the biggest shapes first. In the case of our cylinder, I'm gonna have to be using a bigger brush so that we're making just rectangles, dropping down big fat rectangles. I know there's light side and then there's dark side and then there's a bit of a lighter side again. And now I would go into the shapes inside these shapes. This is its own shape, right? And this is its own shape. But there's a shape within that shape that helps us transition into the darker black. So maybe I'll draw that shape in there. There might be a shape on the outer edge of this shape that shows us more obviously that light is coming from this way, from the left side. So we might are we drawing or are we painting? We might put in a very thin rectangle shape on this side to show the light shape on the far side of the cylinder. And you can see here with like this little practice drawing that I was doing that I limited myself to the bare essence of what line is, of what a drawing is, just making stuff with lines. So I do not have any sort of line opacity. I was not playing around with line weight, tapering the line, getting it thicker or thinner. Oh my god, I'm drawing on the background layer, and everyone's gonna be different. You need to gauge for yourself if this is enough. If you just did this all day, and if you only had an hour and some time to do this, would you call that art and would you call it okay? This form of drawing, this exercise, where its point is to strip down what a line is, one shape, one thickness, one solid value, and what a drawing is, a bunch of lines, and it forces me to confront a product using the bare essentials of drawing to make a drawing. And when I'm confronted with what that looks like after the fact, it makes me ask myself, is this enough? So if it is enough, then I've kind of just set a new standard for what is the bare fundamentals of drawing and drawing art. That's a really interesting conclusion to reach after doing this exercise. If we force ourselves to make the medium lesser and lesser and lesser to a point where it can just barely be called drawing, that's when I feel like we've really just nailed down an essential component of drawing. too. To me, this is enough. And I know that looking like this, that the drawings are kind of ugly. Their faces are real jank. My lines track all over the place. The line work feels kind of rigid. There's not a lot of flow or dynamism, but that's okay. That wasn't like the point for me. It was just to see what would come of this and if I'd be okay calling any of these things a drawing. And I made an old video about one pixel brush drawing, which is basically the same idea, and I use Kim Jung-gi as an example. The little individualized drawings that he does in the front covers of his books are all of a very similar style, where he's making images mostly using only a solid line and maybe filling in some blacks. What really gets me excited about this idea, where you can just draw with a pen and you can also just paint with a pen, it's not beyond us to start drawing like this, thinking about the major forms of someone's face and the planes of their face that their forms might. So in a situation kind of like this, where we've chosen to use lines, we've chosen to use drawing to draw in a more painterly approach, which just again to think about the mapping of the paint by numbers, drawing the bounding lines in the boxes in the paint by numbers approach. This is cool because we can understand through this that painting is not so much doing stuff with paints and a brush. It's more of like a way of thinking, and this really opens it up for everyone because that means that we can use this thing to paint and we can use this thing to improve painting. You know, and obviously I think that goes both ways, where you can certainly use painting tools and painting approaches with the right mindset to improve drawing too, and you know, get yourself into this positive feedback loop, a virtuous cycle. But this is cool because when you think about art like this, when you think about only needing this and this to do both painting and drawing, it really opens up the map as to what you could be doing at any given point in time in any space, when all you need is a piece of paper no bigger than this and a pen. You can be practicing art and improving art in any space, really using, again, anything with no excuses. When we think about art this way, where we've made it so accessible with a bar of entry into being able to sit down and draw, and now being able to sit down and paint, that bar of entry is so low that it's more easier than ever for anyone to get into drawing or painting from anywhere at any time with, again, anything. That also takes away all the excuses that we might have for not drawing and not painting. Maybe this is just the way my mind works, where I need to like lifestyle and environmentally design my life, where I have notebooks and pens everywhere and little pens and notebooks in my jacket to remind myself that at any point in time you can do art and you can practice, or you can just play around and express something if something's on your mind. And you may not be like me, or you have to think about art as this game where we need to scheme to constantly be lowering the bar of entry, making it easier and easier and easier and easier and easier to start and to get into it. Just thinking over like my personal journey in trying to learn art as a whole, it wasn't so much of an issue of what I was drawing or how I was doing it or how I was studying and all this really technical stuff that I love going into personally. At the end of the day, what made the most difference to me and what would continue to make the most and biggest difference in my art goals is not the minutia of meta learning in art education and pedagogy, but instead just simply having more opportunities to engage with art, to sit down and practice art, to sit down and get into it right away. See, if you're doing it, you're eventually gonna get into the zone. If you're in the zone, you're gonna engage with it. And if you're engaging with it, you're learning. And you're learning because of all the sudden influx of brain points that are in the art making itself. That's engagement, right? And if you can just like flick a switch and engage, then you're superior. But if you're just like a normal person who's got like things going on and some days they feel like it, some days they don't feel like it, I don't know, in all the ways that a normal person is normal and how they're going to feel differently about practicing an art every single day. You know, the best thing for the rest of us who aren't like these artistic savants, just giving ourselves more opportunities to sit down and do the thing, because when we have more of that, we'll have more fluke events of accidentally finding ourselves engaged or accidentally falling into the groove, falling into flow. Once you start intuiting how good it feels just to kind of focus on a creative task, you'll start wanting it more and more, and you'll be able to do it and achieve it with predictable engagement rate and a more predictable output. But I think the important lesson to learn here is that it's still mostly a numbers game. So all meta learning concepts aside, all self-help, wellness, business, leadership, productivity bullshit aside, the simple principle for all of this is that if you do more stuff, you'll get more stuff. How do we do more stuff? Do it if it's easy. How is it easy? Drawing. Drawing and art is easy. How do we make drawing easy? Pens and notebooks everywhere. How do we make painting easier? Draw paintings. And it all goes back to this situation where we're setting ourselves up to be able to do more stuff so we can get more out of it. So that's a fun little thought experiment as to what a drawing is and what a painting is, and I'm kind of speaking on two levels here. On one hand, I definitely think it's important to understand how the mechanism works and to prove to ourselves that the mechanism does work by having one incredibly technical example of seeing all the parts in motion, and then once we're convinced, to take a step back and to give ourselves a more simple mental model, how it works, but more importantly, what we need to do. There's an interesting take on how I think drawing and painting works. And in terms of what we need to do, make it easier to draw, make it easier to paint, and I think the best way to do that is with good old paper and pen. Because that's probably the fastest way to get you up and running and into a space where you can just start drawing. Actually, let's test that. We're gonna see which is faster, more accessible, which has a lower barrier of entry. Opening up Photoshop and getting into it doing digital, or picking up a paper and pen. So ready and click. Yeah, I think Photoshop's still loading right now. Paper beats Adobe.